On the morning my college acceptance letter arrived, my brother Marcus tore it from my hands before I could even read my own name on the envelope. I was 17 years old, standing barefoot on the cold kitchen tiles, reaching for that white envelope with the gold university seal when his fingers closed around it first. He laughed. Not a warm, playful kind of laugh. The kind that already knows the ending of a story and wants you to feel small inside it. I watched him wave it above his head like it was a flag, and I was supposed to bow. My mother stood at the stove with her back to both of us, stirring something that smelled like cinnamon and silence. My father had already left for work. And there I was, the girl who had spent 3 years writing essays at midnight, studying through headaches, and working weekends at a bakery just to build a portfolio strong enough to impress the admissions board of Harrington University. That letter was mine. Every word inside it was mine. But that morning, for just a few unbearable minutes, it felt like everything I had worked for belonged to someone else. I want to tell you how I got it back. Not just the letter. All of it. My name is Clara Edens. I grew up in a pale yellow house on the edge of Millbrook, a small town in Ohio where everyone knew everyone and nobody ever forgot anything. My parents were not cruel people. That is important to say first, because this story could easily sound like it had villains, and the truth is messier than that. My father, Raymond Edens, worked long hours at a printing company and came home smelling like ink and exhaustion. My mother, Janet, kept the house, raised us, and volunteered at the church on Sundays. They were good people who made a very human mistake. They loved both their children. They just loved one of us louder. Marcus was 3 years older than me. He was tall, easy with a smile, and had a gift for walking into rooms and making people feel like the party had finally started. Teachers liked him. Neighbors liked him. My parents lit up around him in a way that was different from how they lit up around me. I noticed it early. A child always notices. I told myself it was fine. That every family had a favorite direction the sun shone a little warmer. I told myself I was just imagining it. I told myself that for a very long time. By the time I was in middle school, the pattern was impossible to miss. Marcus played basketball and my father went to every single game, even the away games, even the rainy ones. He sat in the bleachers with a foam hand and a thermos of coffee and cheered so loud his voice cracked. When I joined the school debate team and won second place at the regional competition, my mother put the ribbon on the refrigerator for 4 days, then moved it to a drawer because she needed the magnet. I am not saying these things to make them sound heartless. I am saying them because they are true and because truth is the only thing that ever made sense to me. I started keeping a notebook in 7th grade. Not a diary exactly. More like a record. I wrote down the things I observed, the things that felt uneven, the questions I did not yet know how to ask out loud. Writing helped me feel less invisible. It also helped me get better at something that would matter more than I knew at the time. Putting the right words in the right order. Making someone feel something just by reading a sentence. That notebook became 10 notebooks. Those notebooks became the foundation of every application essay I would ever write. The drawer where my ribbon ended up was the first place I ever decided to build something they could not ignore. Marcus was not a bad brother, not entirely. There were good years between us, years when he taught me to ride a bike in the driveway and let me watch movies past my bedtime when our parents were asleep. I held on to those memories carefully, the way you hold something small and warm in a cold hand. But high school changed things. Or maybe high school just stopped hiding things. Marcus started community college at 19 and dropped out before the first semester ended. He never talked about it directly. He called it a pause, a break, a reset. Our parents called it understandable. They gave him time, money, patience, and second chances in quantities I watched carefully and cataloged privately. Meanwhile, I was quietly doing everything right. Honor roll every semester. Debate captain by junior year. A part-time job that I kept without being asked to. A stack of notebooks filled with observations sharp enough to cut glass. I applied to Harrington University because they had the best communications program in our region, and because I had spent 2 years reading everything their faculty had ever published. I wrote my application essay about what it feels like to sit in a room where you are present but not seen. The admissions board apparently found that interesting. Interesting enough to send me that white envelope with the gold seal that Marcus snatched out of my hands on a Tuesday morning in March. I want to tell you exactly what happened in those first few seconds. Marcus ripped the envelope open. Not carefully. Not with any respect for what it meant. He tore the top edge off and pulled the letter out while I was still reaching, still saying his name, still thinking he would stop. He read the first line and something shifted in his face. It was not happiness for me. It was something older and more complicated. Congratulations, Miss Clara Edens. We are pleased to offer you admission to Harrington University along with our Academic Excellence Scholarship, covering full tuition for 4 years. He read it twice. I could see his eyes moving back across the words. Then he folded it in half and held it behind his back and said, with a grin that did not match his eyes, "Let's see what Mom says." I stood there in my pajamas feeling something I had no name for yet. It was not just anger. It was the particular kind of pain that comes from recognizing a moment you always feared but always hoped would not come. The moment when someone looks at what you earned and decides it says something about them instead of you. I said his name again. He kept walking toward the kitchen. So I followed him. And that decision, to follow instead of shrink, was the first small thing that changed everything. My mother turned from the stove when Marcus walked in waving the letter. Clara got into Harrington, he said. Full scholarship and everything. My mother's face did something complicated. Pride and surprise moved across it together, like two people arriving at the same door at the same time and not knowing who should enter first. That's wonderful, she said. She looked at me, then back at Marcus, then at the letter still in his hand. She did not reach for it. She did not hand it to me. She said, "You'll have to call your father." Marcus set the letter on the table and sat down in front of it like it belonged to him. He started talking about Harrington, about their basketball team, about a friend of his who had gone there and transferred out. My mother listened and stirred and responded. I stood beside the table, looking at my letter on the surface between us, and understood something very clearly. In this kitchen, in this house, my news had already become a conversation about Marcus. This was not new. But it was the day I decided it would be the last time I let it happen without saying something back. I reached across the table, picked up my letter, folded it slowly, and put it in the pocket of my pajama top. Nobody stopped me. Nobody even noticed. Before I tell you what happened next and how the tables turned so completely that even I was surprised, I want to pause for just a second. Tell me where you are right now. Tell me what time it is and what part of this story made you sit up a little straighter. Because I want to know how far Clara Edens and one stolen letter can travel. The reason I am telling this story is not to make you angry at my family. I am telling it because I know some of you have stood in that kitchen. Some of you have watched your news become someone else's conversation. Some of you have held a letter in your pocket instead of above your head because the room did not feel safe enough to celebrate in. This story is for you. And it gets better. I promise. But first you need to understand where I had come from, because the turn only matters if you know the road. I had spent 17 years being the quiet one, the capable one, the one who figures it out. I had been patient in the way that people are patient when they have no other option. But patience, if you feed it with purpose instead of defeat, eventually becomes power. I was about to find out what mine looked like. That evening my father came home and Marcus told him about Harrington before I could say a word. Marcus delivered the news like a gift he had chosen himself. Dad, Clara got into Harrington. Full ride. My father looked at me across the dinner table with an expression that was genuinely warm. He said, "That is something else, Clara." "I mean it." I smiled and said thank you and watched the conversation move on. My father asked Marcus how the job search was going. Marcus said he was looking into a sales position downtown and had a good feeling about it. My father nodded and said, "That's the spirit, son." I ate my green beans and thought about Harrington. I thought about the lecture halls I had seen in photos, the professors whose work I had read, the newspaper they let students run completely independently. I thought about leaving this house and this dinner table and this version of myself. I thought about what it would feel like to walk into a room where nobody had already decided who I was before I opened my mouth. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel invisible. I felt like someone standing just outside a door they were about to open. The letter in my pocket had dried the ink on something that was already written. Now I just had to show up. The weeks between March and August passed in 2 speeds. At school, time moved fast and full. I finished my senior year with a grade point average my counselor described as quietly remarkable. I gave the commencement address at graduation because I had won the senior essay competition with a piece about what it means to be heard and what it means to keep speaking even when you are not. My parents came. Marcus came and sat in the 3rd row and led a clap when I finished that felt genuine, in the way a good moment can make people generous for a few minutes. At home, time moved differently. Marcus had not gotten the sales job. He was working part-time at a car wash and spending his evenings on the couch. My parents were careful around him in the way they had always been careful around him, tiptoeing the edges of his frustration, filling the silences with soft encouragement. I was careful too, but for different reasons. I was saving every dollar from my bakery job. I was making lists of what I needed for the dorms. I was reading about Harrington's student newspaper, the Harrington Herald, and thinking about how I might get involved from day one. 2 tracks, same house. Mine was moving and his was stuck. Neither of us talked about it directly. That was still a few weeks away. The collision happened on a Sunday afternoon in late July. I was in my room with my door open, packing a box with books and notebooks and the small things that add up to a personality when you lay them all out together. Marcus appeared in the doorway. He leaned against the frame with his hands in his pockets and watched me for a minute without saying anything. Then he said, "Must be nice." I looked up. He said it again. "Must be nice to have it all figured out." I set down the book I was holding. I said, "I don't have it all figured out." He made a sound that was half a laugh. "You're leaving," he said. "Full scholarship. Big campus. Clean slate." His voice had something rough in it. Not exactly jealousy. Something more tired than that. I looked at my brother standing in my doorway. I thought about the letter. About the kitchen. About every dinner table conversation that became about him. And I thought about how strange it is that the people who take up all the light in a room can still feel like they are standing in the dark. I said, quietly but clearly, "You could have gone too, Marcus." He didn't answer. He just pushed off the door frame and walked back down the hall. I sat with that silence for a long time before I went back to packing. 2 days before I was supposed to leave for Harrington, Something happened that I did not expect. My mother sat down with me at the kitchen table after dinner. My father was watching television in the next room. Marcus had gone out. She folded her hands on the table and looked at me in a way she did not often look at me, directly and without distraction. She said, "I know we haven't always made it easy for you to feel seen." She said it plainly, without drama, without a long explanation attached. Just the words, landing in the space between us. I did not say it was fine. I did not say don't worry about it. I had spent too many years doing that with feelings that deserved better than a quick burial. I said, "I know you love me. I know things have been uneven. And I just want you to know that I worked for everything I'm about to go do, and I'm proud of that." She nodded. Her eyes were glassy, but she didn't cry. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She said, "We are proud of you. All of it." I believed her. Not because it erased anything, but because some things can be true at the same time. You can be proud of someone and still have failed to show it. You can love someone and still leave them standing invisible at their own table. The morning I left for Harrington was quiet. My father loaded my 2 bags into the car with the careful precision of someone doing something that mattered to him. My mother made the same breakfast she made every important morning, eggs and toast and orange juice in the good glasses. Marcus was awake early, which surprised me. He came downstairs in a worn gray sweatshirt and sat across from me at the table. We ate without talking much. Then just before I carried my last bag to the car, he said my name. "Clara." I turned around. He said, "That thing with the letter. Back in March." I was being a jerk. I said, "Yeah, you were." He nodded like that was the right answer. He said, "You earned it. Every word of it." Something in my chest moved. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet. But the beginning of the path toward it. I picked up my bag. I said, "I know I did." And then I walked out to the car with both things true at once. The hurt of everything that had happened and the clean, solid certainty that none of it had stopped me. I looked out the window as we pulled out of the driveway. The pale yellow house got smaller. I faced forward. Harrington was 3 hours away, and I was already thinking about everything I was going to build when I got there. Harrington University sat on a hill that looked like someone had decided beauty should be part of the curriculum. Red brick buildings with tall windows, walkways lined with old oaks, a central fountain where students gathered between classes. I arrived on a Friday in August and carried my bags up 3 flights of stairs to a small room with 2 beds, 2 desks, and 1 window that looked out over the east lawn. My roommate, a girl named Priya Nath from Cincinnati, arrived an hour after me with 4 suitcases and a box of plants. She looked at me and said, "I hope you don't mind green things." I said green things were fine. We laughed. That was the beginning of the first real friendship I had ever made from scratch, without history or family dynamics already baked in. Priya was studying economics and had opinions about everything and listened the way good people listen, like what you were saying actually changed something in how she thought about things. She asked me on the second night why I looked like someone who was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I told her a little about Marcus, about the letter, about the kitchen and the dinner table and the drawer where my ribbon ended up. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know that has nothing to do with you." I said, "I know." For the first time, I mostly meant it. I walked into the Harrington Herald office during the first week of classes and told the editor, a junior named Daniel Osei, that I wanted to write. He looked up from a cluttered desk and asked what I had done before. I told him about my high school newspaper, my debate wins, the essay competition. He handed me a press badge and an assignment sheet without much ceremony. That's how it started. I covered a faculty retirement, then a student council budget dispute, then a story about the dining hall workers whose contract negotiations had been dragging on for months. That last story got shared beyond campus. It was picked up by the local paper and mentioned by a regional news blog. Daniel sent me a message that said simply, "Good work." I pinned it to my corkboard. At Harrington, nobody knew about the Yellow House or Marcus or the kitchen in March. Nobody had decided yet who I was. I got to walk in fresh, and I walked in writing. Every week, something I made with words went out into the world and came back changed, discussed, responded to. I had been building toward this my whole life without knowing it had a name. The name was journalism. And Harrington was about to show me just how far it could take me if I ran toward it without slowing down. Halfway through my first semester, I got an email from a professor named Dr. Lorraine Voss. She taught a course called Media and Social Change that was normally open only to second-year students. She had read my dining hall worker story. She said she wanted me in her class starting in January. I read her email 4 times. Then I walked to Priya's side of the room and read it to her out loud. Priya threw a pillow at me and said, "Why are you standing there and not already replying yes?" I replied yes. Dr. Voss became one of the most important people in my life at Harrington. She was exacting, fair, and allergic to vagueness. She crossed out entire paragraphs with a red pen and wrote in the margins, "What do you actually mean here?" She taught me that the most important thing in any story was not the words you used, but the ones you were willing to cut. She also ran a mentorship program connected to a National Journalism Foundation that placed student writers in summer fellowships at major publications. She told me in February that she was nominating me. She said it like it was a logical conclusion to a set of facts, not a gift or a favor. "You qualify," she said. "Go apply." So I did. I stayed up until 1 in the morning writing the application. I thought about what I knew about earning something alone. I thought about a white envelope with a gold seal. I wrote the truest thing I had ever written. Back home, things were shifting in slow and complicated ways. I learned from my mother's phone calls that Marcus had left the car wash job and tried 2 others, neither of which lasted. She did not say she was worried, but I could hear it underneath the things she said about the weather and the neighbors and what my father had planted in the garden. Marcus and I texted occasionally, short exchanges, never about anything heavy. He asked how school was going. I said it was going well. He said cool. I said I hoped things were picking up for him. He said they were getting there. This was not nothing. For us, it was actually something. I was learning, slowly, that the anger I carried was not the only thing I could carry. I could hold the facts of what had happened and still leave room for what might be different. That was harder than it sounds. There were still nights I lay in my dorm bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the old weight of every time I had been overlooked. Priya once woke up at 2 in the morning to find me sitting at my desk, not writing, just sitting. She made tea without being asked and sat with me. She said, "You don't have to fix it all tonight." I said I knew. She said, "And you don't owe anyone a resolution before you're ready." I wrote that in my notebook. I still have it. The fellowship application result came in March of my first year, exactly 1 year after the morning of the letter. I know that timing was coincidence, but it felt like something with a sense of story. I was in the library when the email arrived, between 2 stacks of books on investigative reporting methods. The subject line said, "Aldridge Foundation Fellowship, Decision." I sat very still. I opened it. "Dear Miss Edens, we are pleased to offer you a position in our summer fellowship program at the National Tribune in Washington, D.C." There it was. Another white envelope. This one digital. This one uninterrupted. This one mine from beginning to end. I did not call Marcus first. I called Priya. She screamed into the phone loud enough that the student 2 tables over looked up from his laptop. Then I called my mother, who cried in a way that was entirely different from the complicated expression she had made at the stove that March morning. She said, "Clara, I am so proud of you." I said, "Thank you, Mom." I meant it simply, without edges. Then I sat in the library for another hour before I could move. I was not celebrating loudly or performing anything for anyone. I was just sitting with something that was completely, undeniably, unarguably mine. I had built it piece by piece, and nobody had touched a single brick. I went home for spring break, and that was when the real turning of the tables happened. Not in some dramatic single moment, but in the accumulation of a few days that made the before and after impossible to ignore. I arrived on a Thursday evening, and the house smelled like the same cinnamon and familiar things it always had. But the rooms looked slightly different because I was slightly different. My mother had made dinner. My father hugged me at the door like he was genuinely glad to see me and not just performing it. Marcus was there, sitting in the living room, and he stood up when I came in. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said. We sat down to dinner, and something was different about this table. My father asked me about the fellowship. I told them about the National Tribune, about Washington, about the kind of stories I would be covering. Marcus was quiet for most of it. He was looking at his plate more than usual. After dinner, while my mother washed dishes and my father watched the news, Marcus and I ended up in the backyard sitting on the old porch steps the way we used to when we were kids. The sky was dark blue and full of stars. Neither of us talked for a while. It was the first comfortable silence we had shared in years. He spoke first. He said, "Do you remember that morning?" I said, "With the letter?" He said, "Yes." I said I remembered. He said, "I have thought about that a lot this year." He said it without looking at me, his forearms resting on his knees, his eyes on the grass. He said he did not know exactly why he had grabbed it. Something about seeing that envelope, that gold seal, something with my name on it that was clearly a yes when his whole year had been full of different kinds of no. He said it didn't make it right. I said I knew it didn't. I said, "You were standing in the middle of your own thing, and you used my letter to try to feel something about it." He looked at me then. He said, "Yeah, exactly that." We were quiet again. An owl called somewhere in the dark past the fence. I thought about everything I could say. About the years of ribbons in drawers and basketball games in the rain. About the dinner tables and the conversations that turned without warning into being about him. I thought about saying all of it. Instead I said, "I got the fellowship, Marcus. All of it is happening the way I planned it." He said, "I know. That's why I'm saying this now and not before." I looked at the stars. I said, "Okay." That was enough for that night. The next morning, I came downstairs to find Marcus at the kitchen table with a notebook open and a pen in his hand. My notebook. One of the old ones from middle school that I had left in the box in the hall closet. He looked up quickly, startled, like I had caught him doing something private. He started to close it, but I waved my hand. "It's okay," I said. I sat down across from him. He said, "I was looking for something to write on, and this was the only paper I could find." I said, "I believe you." He said, "Clara, these are incredible." He said it with something in his voice that was not pity and was not performance. It was plain surprise. He said, "You've been watching everything all along." I said, "Yes." He sat back. He looked at the open page for a moment. Then he looked at me and said, "What do I do with 1.5 years of not knowing what I'm supposed to be doing?" I said, "You write it down." He almost smiled. I said, I mean it. Everything you've been feeling. The stuck parts and the scared parts. You put it on paper and you find out what it's made of. He looked at the notebook again. I pushed it gently across the table toward him. Keep it, I said. He didn't say anything, but his hand closed around the corner of it. And that was more than I expected from a spring morning in a pale yellow house. I went back to Harrington with two things I had not expected to bring home from that visit. The first was a lighter version of the anger I had carried since March. Not gone. Lighter. There is a difference between forgiving something and releasing the grip you have kept on it so your hand is free to hold something else. I was learning to do the second while still being honest about the first. The second thing was a new story idea. Something about brothers and sisters and the invisible math of family attention. About what happens when one child is raised to believe they can take up all the room and another is raised to believe they should not need any. I wrote it in one long sitting the night I got back, sitting cross-legged on my bed while Priya slept. I sent it to Daniel at the Herald. He ran it the following week. It got more responses than anything I had published before. Messages from students who recognized their own families in it. Messages from older readers who said they had never seen their childhood home described so accurately. One message from a woman in her 40s who said, "I was the one who always took up all the room." This made me stop and think. I printed that one out and added it to the corkboard above my desk, next to Daniel's first good work message. Evidence that words, handled carefully, could reach through a screen and touch something real. Summer in Washington was nothing like Millbrook. The National Tribune building was tall and glass-fronted and full of people who moved through hallways with the purpose of people who knew exactly where they were going. My supervisor was a senior reporter named Grace Adler, who had been covering federal policy for 15 years and who gave feedback in short, sharp sentences that I wrote down immediately after every conversation. She said on my first day, "Your job this summer is to be useful, curious, and fast." I said I could do that. I spent the first 2 weeks fact-checking and research. Then I wrote a background piece on a housing policy debate. Then Grace let me co-report a story on education funding that ran on page 7. Page 7 of the National Tribune. I called Priya. I called my mother. My mother read the piece 3 times and then read the byline out loud to my father, Clara Edens, National Tribune. She told me later that she had screenshot the byline and sent it to every person in her phone. Something about that made me laugh in a way that felt entirely uncomplicated. Not everything had been fixed. Not everything was perfectly resolved. But something was showing up now that had not been there before. My name in print, in a place my family could not ignore, saying something I had worked hard enough and long enough to earn the right to say. Marcus texted me in July. He said he had started writing in the notebook. He said it was harder than he expected. He said he didn't know if he was any good at it. I wrote back, "It's not about being good at first. It's about being honest." He sent a thumbs up. Then, 3 days later, he sent me 3 paragraphs he had written about the morning of the letter. About what had moved through him when he saw that gold seal, about the shape of his own fear that year, about what it felt like to watch someone younger go somewhere you couldn't follow. They were rough, unpolished, honest. I read them twice. Then I wrote back, "This is good, Marcus. Real good. Keep going." He wrote, "You think so?" I wrote, "I know so." He wrote, "How do you know?" I wrote, "Because it made me feel something I didn't expect to feel." He didn't respond for a while. Then he wrote, "Thanks, Clara." I sat with my phone in the Washington summer, the Tribune building across the street, the sound of the city doing what cities do, and I thought about how strange and true it is that the people who take from you without meaning to are sometimes the very people who, if you give them the right tool at the right moment, might begin to see what they took and what it cost and what you built anyway. Sometimes that is enough. Not always, but sometimes. I came home at the end of August before my second year started. The pale yellow house looked the same from the street, but felt different when I walked in. Maybe I was different. Maybe both things were true. My father grilled chicken in the backyard, and my mother made her good potato salad, and the four of us sat at the outdoor table in the warm end of summer air. Marcus talked about a writing workshop he had looked into at the community center. My mother asked questions. My father nodded and said, "That sounds like a solid step, son." The same encouragement he had always given Marcus. But this time I watched it differently. Not with the old measuring gaze. Just as a daughter watching her father be kind to his son. My phone buzzed. A message from Grace Adler at the Tribune, asking if I had considered applying for the full-time staff writer role they were opening for recent graduates in 2 years. She said she would keep me in mind. I set my phone face down on the table and ate my chicken and looked at my family in the evening light. The yellow house. The old oak at the edge of the yard. The table where so many dinners had gone the way they went. I had built something here too, in ways I hadn't planned. Not just a career. A version of myself that could sit at this table and eat her chicken and feel the whole complicated truth of her life and not need it to be simpler than it was. So here is what I want to tell you if you are still with me. If you are watching from wherever you are watching, whatever time it is, whatever version of this story you have lived yourself. The letter was mine. I knew it the morning Marcus grabbed it. I knew it when I slipped it into my pajama pocket and walked out of that kitchen without making a scene. I knew it through every late night at the bakery, every debate round, every notebook I filled with careful observations nobody asked me to make. The tables turned not in one dramatic moment of revenge or public humiliation. They turned slowly, the way real things turn. They turned every time I chose purpose over defeat. Every time I filed a story instead of stewing in the injustice of things. Every time I let Priya make me tea at 2 in the morning and believed her when she said it didn't have to be fixed tonight. Every time I pushed a notebook across a kitchen table toward someone who needed it more than I needed to be right. The tables turned in seconds, yes. But only because I had spent years setting them. If you are at your own bus stop, your own kitchen, your own drawer where the ribbon ended up, hear me say this. What is yours. Build it carefully, quietly, one true thing at a time. No one can take it once it lives in you. That was always the part they couldn't touch.